A Freedom of Information Law Guide. Chapter 1. The Freedom of Information Act. Freedom of Information Act. The Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, allows public access to certain federal government records with some exceptions, namely the records kept by the courts, the CIA, Congress and several other agencies. There are 9 exemptions and 3 exclusions to the release of information. Exclusions differ from exemptions in that exempt items can still be released by the agency if the release is not prohibited by law and would cause no foreseeable harm. With exclusions, no is the final word. The exemptions are: classified national defense and foreign relations information, internal agency rules and practices, interagency or intra-agency communications that are protected by legal privileges, information involving matters of personal privacy, most law enforcement records, information relating to the supervision of financial institutions, information that is prohibited from disclosure by another law, trade secrets and other confidential business information, geological information on wells. The exclusions are: current law enforcement investigations, informants in law enforcement investigations, FBI records relating to terrorism, espionage, and foreign intelligence. FOIA requests must be made in writing and should be directed to the FOIA officer of the individual agency that records are being requested from. If a FOIA request is denied, the denial could be appealed with the agency. If the denial is upheld, you could file a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court if you want to press it. When you request your records from the government, you usually have to pay a copying fee for photocopies. To make a request for your records, write a letter to the appropriate agency. Every agency has a code of federal regulations. You might have to refer to that for specific guidelines. If your records are exempt under the Privacy Act, you might still be able to get access to them via the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, so use both acts as your authority whenever making a request for information from the government. Every agency publishes a list of its record systems in the Federal Register. You can either look at this list in the Register or at a smaller document called Protecting Your Right to Privacy, Digest of Systems of Records, either at the library or by writing to the Superintendent of Documents, U.S. Government Printing Office, Washington, D.C. 20402. access.gpo.gov/SU_docs. When you look at the list, try to pick out the exact documents you want so it will be easier to process for the clerks who handle your request for information. Agencies are under no time limits to respond, but if you don't get a response within 30 days, you should check on it and start complaining to higher authorities if necessary. Once you get your records, if you find something that you believe is wrong in them, you have the right to request that it be changed. If they deny your request, you have the right to appeal to the head of the agency. If you're dissatisfied with the apparent lack of documents you get in your request for information, you might be able to appeal to the particular agency and ultimately sue them in civil court. To obtain FOIA officer contact information for any federal agency, call the Federal Information Center, 800-688-9889, fic.info.gov. All states now have their own state versions of the FOIA applicable to state government records. The Freedom of Information Act is located at 5 U.S.C. 552. State that in your letters for information. Freedom of Information websites. Public Information Office, U.S. Department of Justice, Washington, D.C. 20530. USDOJ.gov. Booklet, Your Right to Federal Records, Questions and Answers on the Freedom of Information Act and the Privacy Act. 1215.org/lawnotes/FOICL.htm. accessreports.com. accessreports.com/links. aclu.org/library/FOIA, Freedom of Information. citizen.org/litigation/FOIC/FOIC, 202-785-3704. citizen.org/public_citizen/litigation/FOIC/foil/GUID.html, Freedom of Information Act Users Guide. citizenaccess.org, Marion Brechner Citizen Access Project, lots of freedom of information resources from the University of Florida's Journalism School. csf.colorado.edu/eforum/comm/freedom-of-info-act. epic.org/open_gov/rights. fas.org/sgp/foia/citizen.html, Citizens Guide on Using the Freedom of Information Act, How to Use the Freedom of Information Act. foi.law.udas.edu.au/bookmarks/foi_index.html. foi.law.udas.edu.au/bookmarks/foi_index.html. foia.cia.gov. foia.com, variety of databases. foia.state.gov. foiservices.com. ire.org/foi, IRE Center, on Freedom of Information. nciss.org, this trade group of investigators lobbies to make the FOIA stronger. privacy.org/pi/issues/FOIA. rcfp.org, 703-807-2100, Reporters Committee for Freedom of Press helps journalists with FOIA requests. rcfp.org/foiact/index, FOIA Guidebook. spj.org/foia, Society of Professional Journalists. spj.org/foia/foi resources/states/index, state FOI laws, Society of Professional Journalists. syr.edu/bcfot/foiers, FOI resources. usdoj.gov/04foia. usdoj.gov/dea/foia, Freedom of Information. usdoj.gov/oip, Office of Information and Privacy. usdoj.gov/oip/FOIA_updates/vol_18_4/page 2. usdoj.gov/oip/foi-act.htm, DOJ on FOIA, the DOJ's take on the FOIA. ushda.org, Historical Documents Archive. WashingtonResearchers.com, 202-333-3499, help clients with FOIA requests. Superintendent of Documents. POB 371954. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania 15250-7954. 202-512-1800. access.gpo.gov/su_docs. Booklet, A Citizen's Guide on Using the FOI Act to Request Government Records. Also a newsletter, FOIA Update. FBI FOIA Unit. 9th and Pennsylvania Ave. NW. Washington, D.C. 20535. 202-324-5520. foia.fbi.gov. Freedom of Information Act Requests. Freedom of Information Canada. CAPA.ca, Access and Privacy Association. OpenGovernmentCanada.org. OpenGovernmentCanada.org/resources. qsilver.queensu.ca/foi. tbs-sct.gc.ca/goes-sog/infosource, information sources in the federal government. Freedom of Information UK. cfoi.org.uk. irlgov.ie/finance/free1, Ireland. open.gov.uk. US FOIA offices. Each federal agency has a FOIA office where you direct your FOIA searches to. Air Force. 703-588-6187. af.mil. Amtrak, National Railroad Passenger Corporation. 202-906-2728. amtrak.org. Army. 703-806-5698. Army.mil. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. 202-927-8480. ATF.gov. Central Intelligence Agency. 703-613-1287. CIA.gov. Commission on Civil Rights. 202-376-8351. USCCR.gov. Commodity Futures Trading Commission. 202-418-5101. CFTC.gov. Consumer Product Safety Commission. 301-504-0785. CPSC.gov. Controller of the Currency. 202-874-4700. OCC.trees.gov. Department of Agriculture. 202-720-8164. USDA.gov. Department of Commerce. 202-1482-4115. DOC.gov. Department of Defense. 703-697-1160. DefenseLink.mil. Department of Education. 202-708-4753. ED.gov. Department of Energy. 202-586-5955. DOE.gov. Department of Health and Human Services. 202-690-7453. HHS.gov. Department of Housing and Urban Development. 202-708-3866. HUD.gov. Department of the Interior. 202-208-5342. DOI.gov. Department of Justice. Office of the Attorney General. 202-514 FOLA. USDOJ.gov. Department of Labor. 20,212 19-8188. DOL.gov. Department of State. 202-261-8314. State.gov. Department of Transportation. 202-366-4542. DOT.gov. Department of the Treasury. 202-622-0930. Trees.gov. Department of Veterans Affairs. 202-273-8135. VA.gov. Environmental Protection Agency. 202-260-4048. EPA.gov. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. 202-663-4669. EEOC.gov. Federal Aviation Administration. 202-267-9165. FAA.gov. Federal Communications Commission. 202-418-0212. FCC.gov. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. 202-898-3819. FDIC.gov. Federal Election Commission. 202-694-1220. FEC.gov. Federal Emergency Management Agency. 202-646-3840. FEMA.gov. Federal Trade Commission. 202-326-2013. FTC.gov. Food and Drug Administration. 301-827-6567. FDA.gov. General Accounting Office. 202-512-2958. GAO.gov. Internal Revenue Service. 202-622-6250. IRS.gov. Library of Congress. Copyright Office. 707-6800. LOC.gov. Marine Corps. 703-614-3685. USMC.mil. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. 202-482-2621. NOAA.gov. National Aeronautics and Space Administration. 202-358-0205. NASA.gov. National Archives and Records Administration. 301-713-6025. NARA.gov. National Indian Gaming Commission. 202-632-7003. National Labor Relations Board. 202-273-1944. NLRB.gov. National Transportation Safety Board. 202-314-6551. NTSB.gov. National Security Agency. 301-688-6527. NSA.gov. Navy. 202-685-6545. Navy.mil. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. 301-415-7169. NRC.gov. Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission. 202-606-5398. OSHA.gov. Office of the Inspector General. 703-604-9775. IGNET.gov. Securities and Exchange Commission. 202-942-4320. SEC.gov. Selective Service System. 703-605-4012. SSS.gov. Small Business Administration. 202-401-8203. SBA.gov. Social Security Administration. 410-965-1727. SSA.gov. United States Coast Guard. 202-267-1086. USCG.mil. United States Customs Service. 202-927-1805. CBP.gov. United States Postal Service. 202-268-2608. USPS.gov. USPS.com. United States Secret Service. 202-406-6370.